So today, let's start a new series, which is about the PyTorch. Okay, so we're gonna start this series, and we assume that we don't have any prior knowledge on this. Okay, so we start from zero, and this is a very friendly series for the beginners of PyTorch. Okay, so we know that PyTorch is pretty useful for the studies on deep learning, and you may use PyTorch to construct your own algorithms or your own architectures in many deep learning or deep reinforcement learning studies, right? So on and so forth. So we're not gonna talk about those too much, but let's go directly into the fundamentals. Okay, good. So for the first episode, I think I'll start from the basic thing. Okay, in PyTorch, that'll be this tensor. Okay, so and we know that tensor, we're not talking about mathematics here. Okay, so the tensor in PyTorch, that is just a multi-dimensional array. Okay, it's sort of, you can treat the tensor as some one-dimensional vector or maybe a two-dimensional matrix, and that is just, tensor is just a generalized version of vector and matrix. Okay, it can be something in a higher dimension, so that's it, right? Okay, so you can just think this tensor as a high dimensional matrix or vector. Okay, because we only have one dimension for vector and two dimensions for matrix, but you're gonna need more dimensions for some other representations, right? So that's why we're using tensor. Okay, so the basic properties or the very fundamental issues when we're talking about some vector or matrix or tensor is we're gonna know about the dimension of that tensor. Okay, so that's very important. And another thing is the shape. Okay, so the shape of a tensor, that will be just the size of each dimension. Okay, so for example, if you have for example, using a matrix, maybe it's 2 by 3, right? So this is a matrix with two dimensions, right? And the size of each dimension will be 2 and 3, right? So that's it. Okay, so what I mean by this, start with the most outside one. So that is just, you'll see this later. Okay, so that's just the way that it outputs this this function, this shape function. Okay, so you're gonna count that size for each dimension from the most outside one. Okay, and then go inside step by step. Okay, so that's the shape. Okay, good. So, and another thing is the dimensions. Okay, so it's used by this ndim function. Okay, so the dimensions, you can count dimensions in two ways basically. So one way is to count the number of the left hand side square bracket in the beginning of that tensor. Okay, so for example, if we have this x to be a torch function of this tensor, so this x is a tensor, so we're gonna count, we have 1 and 2. Okay, so we have two square brackets in the beginning, so we have two dimensions. Okay, because we're gonna put brackets on each of those dimensions, and for example, you have 1, 2, and you're gonna put the brackets here, so you indicate that 1, 2, they're at the same dimension. Okay, 3 and 4, they're at the same dimension. 5 and 6 at the same dimension, and you put all those together to form another dimension. Okay, so you can count the numbers of those square brackets in the beginning or in the end, right? So it's the same. So that's one way. Okay, another way you can understand this dimension, that'll be just exactly the length of this shape, the output of the shape function. Okay, so and you can, this is very easy to understand, right? So for the shape, you have, for example, let's have example here. Okay, so this X, we have this tensor to have those 2 dimensions, right? And on this smaller one, we have those 3 elements, and for the bigger one, we have this one, right? So this has 2 dimensions. And we're going to print this X, and we're going to first print the shape of this X, and the dimension of that, and the length of the shape. And we're going to compare if we have those 2. This would be the same, right? Okay, so let's run this, and you can see that this is the tensor that we put in, and this would be, this corresponds to the shape, right, as we mentioned. So this has 3 elements from the here, right? So this has 3 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, right? So that's the first size of this dimension, right? And then we're gonna also have the other one, because we still have the shape for all of those vectors inside, right? So we have 2, okay, and 2 and 2, right? So this is why we have this shape to be 3 and 2, right? And we said that the number of dimension that would be 2. Okay, we can either count the number of those brackets from left or from right, which are the same, or you can just use the take the length of the shape of X. Okay, and that's going to be exactly the same as we put here as the number of dimensions. Okay, good. So this is simply because if you can see that we have 3 as the size for the first dimension, and this is the 2 as the size for the second dimension. We're gonna have this list, right? So this list indicates, so the number of elements in this list indicates how many dimensions you have, right? So that exactly we're gonna just count the length of this list. That gives us the length of that gives us the number of dimensions. Okay, so that's essentially we have the same thing here by those 2 lines. All right, good. So this is a very fundamental and basic thing, I think, right, in the Tensor and in PyTorch, and everything should start from here, right? So later we can talk about the multiplications or some other operations, or even some more interesting functions on those tensors. But before that, in this very first video, we're gonna understand how to make those tensors, right? And to make sure that we understand correctly on the dimensions and on the shape of those tensors. Okay, so this is very important. Good. So and also I want to talk about something else for the first video, that is this function rand, or this random, right? And this rand function, and this is just a pseudo random number generator. Okay, so it generates some numbers between 0 and 1. Okay, so and let's have example. Let's say this y. Okay, it is torch random, and so here we have some input. Okay, so this 2 and 3, that is exactly what we were talking about for this shape. Okay, so if we want this shape to be 3 and 2, we're gonna put 3 and 2 here. But here I just, for example, let's put, so sorry, this would be 2 and 3. Okay, so this gives a tensor with shape 2 and 3. And again, the number of dimension we said, right? So that would be just the length of this list. That would be 2. Okay, so let's run this, and you can see that this y, when we print this y, that gives us this this matrix, right? Or we just call this as tensor. Okay, so this is a tensor, and that has a shape. So we have 2 for the out. You remember that what I said before, we're going to count from the most outside, right? So we're going to count. So this is 1 and this is 2, right? So we have 2 elements from the most outside sort of bracket, right? And you're going to have 3 elements inside of each. Okay, so that gives us this shape of 2 and 3. Okay, good. And again, the number of dimensions, you can count those brackets. So we have 2, right? Or you can just take the length of shape of y. That gives us the same, right? Because we have those 2 dimensions, right? So for the first dimension, we have the size for that dimension to be 2, and the second dimension we have 3 as the size of that. Okay, so we have in total we have 2 dimensions. Good. So this rand, it should be taking some random number generating process from a uniform distribution. Okay, but if you put some letter n, that should give you the random numbers from a normal distribution. Okay, but that'll be something later. Okay, so good. So those would be the very first episode for our PyTorch series, and I hope this will be useful for us to make our own progress based on the very fundamental things. Okay, good.